The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Neurodiversity at Work. That is the topic of today's event. And we have with us Shelly Burkhardt, who's an Accessible Ohio specialist with the Division of Employer Innovation Services at Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. This is Victoria Beal with the LTAP Center, and I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items, and then I will turn things over to Shelly. First off, if you have questions throughout the presentation, there is a question box in the GoToWebinar panel. We would encourage you to put your questions in as we go along, and we'll be we will be answering those questions at the end. So please feel free to enter them, though, as you think of them. The other thing is there is a handout in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, and you should be able to click on that and download it. If you're not able to, don't worry though, we will send you out a link afterwards. And last but not least, we are attempting to record the webinar. If it's successful, we will definitely share a link out with you. If it's not successful, we will not be able to share the link, so that's a good thing you're here. So we're going to go ahead and get things rolling. Shelly, are you ready?
I am. Thank you, Victoria. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shelly Burkhardt, and as Victoria shared, I am an Accessible Ohio specialist with Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, which is the state of Ohio agency dedicated to empowering Ohioans with disabilities through employment, disability determination, and independence. And today's presentation will include an overview of neurodiversity and neurodivergence and include some myth busting. I'll share some ways to create a disability inclusive workplace culture by sharing some disability etiquette and awareness tips. And then I'll talk about the interactive process and what is unique about providing reasonable accommodations related to neurodivergence. And I'll include examples, of course. I will also have an interactive exercise near the end of the presentation. I'm so happy that you're all here today. And with that, we're going to get started. When the Accessible Ohio team first created this presentation, we began with learning more about the terminology to use because neurodiversity and neurodivergence seem to be used interchangeably. We wanted to know whether these were two words for the same concept or if there's a difference between the two. And we wanted to know how the term neurotypical fit into the whole picture. So this is what we found out. Neurodiversity is the term used to acknowledge the natural variation that exists in the human brain and recognizes that no two individuals are the same. This variation refers to how we think, process information, learn, interact, behave, and perceive the world. Neurodivergence is the term that refers to the variation in the human brain that is outside what is recognized as the norm for brain function. And then the term neurotypical is used to refer to the variation in the human brain that falls within the norm. Now, because environments are often created for the variation in the brain that falls within the norm, we're going to address the variation that is outside of the norm and address ways to provide accommodations in the workplace to enable individuals with neurodivergence to perform work activities just as effectively, just in another way. But first, let's do some myth busting about neurodiversity and debunk some common misconceptions. So the first myth is that neurodiversity only includes autism. The fact is, while the term neurodiversity was first created by an Australian sociologist who has autism, the neurodiversity movement expanded over time to include other conditions like epilepsy, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The next myth is that people who are neurodivergent are best suited for jobs with repetitive tasks. The fact is, there isn't a specific job or task that's best suited for individuals who are neurodivergent. What makes each of us neurodiverse is that our brains function uniquely and are not the same. So while some individuals may enjoy and excel at performing repetitive tasks, others may enjoy being innovative and seek jobs where they can be creative. A resource from EARN, which is the employer assistance, just lost my train of thought. EARN, which is the Employer Assistance Resource Network in Disability Inclusion, says some employers have experienced neurodivergent employees successfully applying their skills to jobs that require attention to detail, reasoning, and that have complex processes, which have led these employers to recruit other neurodivergent candidates for positions in cybersecurity, data analysis, and software engineering and testing. Some individuals who are neurodivergent excel in jobs that include focusing on communications, social media use, and the design and manufacturing of new products. So overall, it's best not to assume certain jobs or tasks are best suited for someone based on a disability type. Another myth that we have is that individuals who are neurodivergent prefer not to form relationships. It's true that some people who are neurodivergent have limitations with social interactions and with understanding social cues. But this does not mean they prefer not to form relationships. In fact, genuine and fulfilling relationships are possible when both parties accept one another and their differences. So we have a few more myths to debunk. There's another misperception that individuals who are neurodivergent lack communication skills. Communication skills can be impacted when that's the case. Individuals may have a preferred way of communicating. For example, a person may need time to process what they've heard and formulate a response. Now, another person may prefer to communicate through writing. So it's helpful to consider the needs and preferences of the individual. And in the workplace, remember that accommodations are available. The next myth is the idea that individuals who are neurodivergent have intellectual disabilities. Remember, many conditions fall under the category of neurodivergence. One of those conditions is intellectual disabilities. So there is some truth in the myth in that some people who are neurodivergent may have an intellectual disability, but others may not. In general, the limitations an individual who is neurodivergent may experience are often not related to intelligence. They involve perception, thought processes, and social interactions. Many individuals who are neurodivergent have an intelligent quotient or IQ in the typical range or higher as well. The final myth that we're going to discuss is that individuals who are neurodivergent should be encouraged to be like their neurotypical peers. As we know, neurodiversity means no two people's brains are the same, And there's a benefit to that in the way we approach solving problems and the way we bring creativity and innovation to work tasks. The focus should be on accepting all individuals. And from a work perspective, remember to collaborate with the individual to provide accommodations when they're needed. That enables the employee to perform the job using their unique talent and skills. So with that, I'm going to continue with sharing a bit about the variety of conditions that are included in this category of neurodivergence. According to EARN, 15 to 20% of the population in the United States is neurodivergent. This is a large category of conditions that include a wide variance of abilities and limitations when it comes to brain functions. Autism is included in this category. What might not be as well known are the other conditions that are also included. These include conditions like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, learning disabilities like dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, mental health conditions like bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, social anxiety, and schizophrenia, and conditions like dyspraxia, epilepsy, intellectual disabilities, sensory processing disorders, and Tourette's syndrome. Everyone has their own natural variance, but some common limitations that can be part of neurodivergent conditions include difficulty with social interaction, communication, speech, and language, limitations with functions like learning, reading, memory, self-control, and being flexible and thinking, sensitivity or insensitivity to sensory input, so things like light, sound, temperature, and crowds, difficulty with motor coordination. At times, physical behaviors may be present, like rocking or the expression of tics, blurting things out. And then there could be limitations with adapting to changes or transitions. It's important to remember that along with our natural variation in brain function, we also have our own unique abilities, strengths, and limitations. Someone with a neurodivergent condition may experience some of the limitations listed, but very rarely would someone experience them all. So it's always important to remember that each individual is unique. There are benefits to the fact that no two brains function exactly the same. This variance is very beneficial. What some employers have recognized is this variance in how individuals learn, perceive the environment, and process information is leading to improved creativity, innovative thinking, and problem solving in the workplace. And like I mentioned, so often environments are created for the norm. But when we take a step back and really think about expanding the environment to include this variance described by neurodiversity, what we're really doing is creating environments where all individuals have the flexibility to perform work in the way their brain is designed to do most effectively. So it makes sense to me that employers who make these efforts are noticing benefits in the workplace. So let's talk about how we can cultivate a workplace culture where everyone feels comfortable to be their unique self and ask for what they need in the workplace. One way employers can influence this type of culture from the perspective of all disability types is to establish a process for providing reasonable accommodations and then supporting that process by posting a reasonable accommodation statement in key areas. And these key areas may include places like hiring websites, job descriptions, invitations to events, and those events could be interviews, onboarding, trainings, or even other types of events. Another idea is to offer a variety of types of education to all employees. Certainly, it's important to train new employees on the reasonable accommodation process, but also to train all employees and supervisors on a regular basis. Education can also mean including topics related to disability in employee newsletters that include dispelling the stereotypes and myths that can exist. Those are some general ways employers can impact their culture. And when we think specifically about neurodiversity in the workplace, remember, this impacts everyone because as we know, each of our brains is unique in the way it functions and processes information. And we know this can be beneficial in the workplace because people will bring their unique approach to solving problems and sharing their own creative ideas, which can inspire innovative products and services. So here are some ways to foster a neurodiverse culture. You could ask all employees what tools and support they need to do their jobs effectively. You could consider everyone's needs when creating office and workspace arrangements. You could offer a variety of types of social activities to build camaraderie and teamwork. So employees can really choose the social setting that works best for them. And remember to give advance notice when you can of any changes planned at work, along with the reason for the change. Employees who view their employers as disability inclusive are often more comfortable disclosing their disability and asking for what they need in the workplace. So many neurodivergent conditions are invisible. This means no one knows the employee has a disability unless that person discloses. Choosing to disclose can be a difficult choice for employees to make, and it's always that individual's decision. Some reasons people may choose not to disclose or request an accommodation include fears that it will negatively impact whether they are hired for a job or selected for a promotion, or a fear that disclosing will make others judge them and they won't feel like they fit in. However, some people may choose to disclose. Some people who are neurodivergent have reported disclosing and asking for an accommodation made them feel more comfortable being themselves at work, and it relieved the energy it took to keep that information private. So freeing them up to focus that energy on applying their talent and skills on the job, so they can really focus on that job rather than on keeping that private. So for many reasons, it's beneficial for employers to foster disability inclusive cultures. Another way to foster an inclusive workplace is to provide disability awareness education to all employees and supervisors on a regular basis. I have 4 disability etiquette tips to share here too that are really helpful. So the first is to show respect. People with disabilities are people first. So focus on the person and not on the disability. Next, be courteous. This includes respecting a person's personal space and any reasonable accommodations they may use at work. Another tip is don't assume. All people are unique with limitations and abilities. Don't assume you know what a person can or cannot do. Instead, let the person decide what they can do. And a final tip, ask first. If you think someone needs assistance, don't automatically provide the help you think they need. Ask the person if they need help, and if they do, ask how you can help. I also have some tips for interacting with people who are neurodivergent. When you're communicating with an individual who is neurodivergent, always presume competence. It's respectful to talk to the person, not to someone else about the person. Just because the individual may have limitations with communicating doesn't mean they don't understand what you're saying. When you are talking, be direct with your questions and use plain language, which is clear and concise and free of jargon or slang terms. Be patient and give the person time to respond. And at times, it may be helpful to write information down or use images when communicating with someone. Also, if the person responds to you with a blunt or frank comment, don't take it personally. And remember to look past repetitive behaviors the person may display, just as you would ignore a person twirling their hair between their fingers, and focus on the unique person you're interacting with. Now I will shift to a quick overview of reasonable accommodations and the interactive process, and share examples of reasonable accommodations related to neurodivergence. A reasonable accommodation is a change in the way something is customarily done at work to enable an individual with a disability to compete for a job, perform a job, and enjoy the privileges of employment. It's important to know that not every person with a disability needs an accommodation. However, when an accommodation is requested, the employer should begin the interactive process quickly. This is the collaborative process. The interactive process is the collaborative process described by the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as the ADA, where both parties work together to identify and implement an effective solution. So let's review what constitutes a reasonable accommodation request. When we talk about a reasonable accommodation request, a person just needs to communicate they need a change at work that's related to a medical condition or a disability. That's enough for an employer to be on notice that they've received a request for an accommodation. The person can use plain language, so the request doesn't have to reference the ADA or the term reasonable accommodation. The request may be made in the individual's preferred form of communication. Individuals who are neurodivergent may have limitations in their communication skills. Therefore, a reasonable accommodation process that specifies a very specific or certain way to communicate the accommodation request might exclude some people. A person's preferred form may include an in-person conversation, an email, a text, or even a phone call. An individual who is neurodivergent may have difficulty communicating a request in general. So the ADA indicates a request can come from another party, like a family member or a medical provider. And it's helpful to remember that a request can be made at any point during the hiring process or during employment. A person may not need an accommodation until a barrier presents itself, and so a person isn't required to know they need an accommodation and ask for it at any specific time. Once a request is received, begin the interactive process promptly. Obtain documentation if needed and permitted, and then collaborate with the individual to determine an effective solution. Now, the best place to start is to ask the person what ideas they have, as they may have encountered this barrier in the past and know what will work best. It's helpful to know that accommodations are organized into these various types. An accommodation may include making the work environment accessible, restructuring a job, possibly permitting a flexible schedule, altering supervisory methods, providing or altering equipment and services, modifying policies, and providing reassignment. And I'm going to share a few examples of accommodations for each of these types. So a person who is neurodivergent may experience sensitivities in the workplace to things like sounds, lights, fragrances, and temperature. Some ways to include making the workplace accessible then would be maybe relocate a workstation to a quieter area, or replace overhead lighting with LED lighting, or even provide an alternative lighting option. I know in our office, some people have like a desk lamp at their cubicle. Permit the temperature to be adjusted. And maybe institute a fragrance-free environment. Now, restructuring the job means the employer is looking for a solution to perform the job's essential functions in another way, or is considering whether the job's marginal functions can be removed or traded with a coworker. So one idea relates to what we just talked about, sensitivities to elements in the workplace. A solution might be permit the employee to telework. Other ideas related to restructuring how the job is performed include breaking down large projects into smaller steps maybe, or providing instructions in the person's preferred format, which could be maybe written, audio, images, or in an email, or maybe compiling written information in a more organized way by using section headers and bullet points in the documents. A reasonable accommodation can be as simple as providing a flexible schedule. One idea for this is to permit an employee to work during those hours when there are fewer people working. And another is to provide a modified break schedule. So maybe an employee can take breaks as needed to have a movement break or to call a family member or friend for support throughout the workday. Another type of reasonable accommodation can be to alter supervisory methods. And this could mean possibly changing the frequency of how often the supervisor meets with the employee to provide feedback on work tasks. Or it could mean providing instructions using plain language, which is clear, concise, and free of undefined technical terms or jargon. It could also mean delivering feedback that specifically explains errors and how to correct them, which can impact the accuracy of task performance. And one last example is to provide the employee with advance notice of events or changes at work, like an upcoming training session or scheduled changes. Equipment and services are another type of reasonable accommodation. Two examples of common services that can be provided as an accommodation include job developers and job coaches. The first, job developer, as an accommodation would occur during the hiring process. A job coach, on the other hand, can help a person with a disability onboard to a new job. As far as equipment being reasonable accommodations, many types of assistive technology can be effective depending on what the job task is and what limitation or barrier is present. There are software and apps that support literacy through word prediction, for instance, checking for spelling errors and offering corrections for grammar. There are items like digital recorders, digital timers, and reminder apps to support memory or assist with organization. To support viewing text on the computer monitors, there are solutions like screen filters, tinting tools, and controls for font size, font style, and color contrast. To filter out noise in the background, there are examples of noise canceling headphones or earbuds, which can both be good options. Remember, when exploring options during the interactive process, the employee may know what they need. So ask the employee if there is equipment they have used before that was effective. Modifying a policy is another type of reasonable accommodation. So one example is to modify a dress code policy to permit an employee with a tactile sensitivity to wear an alternative uniform at work. Another is to modify a training policy and provide materials in advance and to permit the use of a job coach during onboarding. I've shared examples of accommodations for employment, so I'd like to share a few possible accommodations for the hiring process as well. One idea is to provide interview questions in advance. You could also allow for written responses during an interview, or you could allow an office visit prior to the interview to help someone prepare. So now that we've talked about these a little bit, let's put some of these concepts into real-world scenarios, because I don't know about you, but that's helpful to me. So we're going to reflect a little bit right now on this information. So I invite you to answer the following questions to yourself, or you may enter your answers into the question and answer area, these first sets of questions. So the first question is this: have you ever had a day where something really bugs you and it makes it more difficult to work? Have you ever wished the office light was dimmer or maybe brighter?
You're getting quite a few yeses in the question box.
I'm getting quite a few yeses. That's good.
Yep.
How about noise? Have you ever wished someone would turn down their notifications on their phone or their computer?
A couple people have said no, but one person had a resounding absolutely to that question.
Which sort of speaks to the variances we all have, right? We all have different ways of processing different sensory input. How about this one? Have you ever been distracted by the smell of someone's warmed up lunch or maybe someone's cologne or perfume?
Boy, that one got a yes with a couple exclamation points.
Have you ever wished the office was a little cooler or maybe a little warmer?
The yeses are rolling in, and I have to tell you, I'm sitting here in front of my little desktop fan, so I'll jump on that bandwagon.
You and me both there. Okay, so now that we've thought about those, I'm going to be asking some questions. And for these, I'd really like you to enter your answers into the question and answer section. So when we think about these, just the general question is this: what could be changed in your workspace to help with each of these? For instance, what are some ideas for lighting? What do you think in your workspace could be changed to help you or someone else with lighting sensitivities?
One person put in LEDs.
LEDs, great answer.
Individual controls, desktop lamps instead of the overhead. Ask people if the overhead lights are a problem. More natural lighting, desk lighting, dimmer switch. Change light temperature. Work from home. Blinds over windows. Remove the overhead lights. Change bulbs. Provide covers for overhead lights. Yeah, that's all that's coming in.
Those are amazing answers. Those are terrific. Thank you. I love all those answers. And it wasn't all about just the lighting. It was some different options in there that included the telework idea, or moving people, or the shades, and thinking of those types of things. So that's terrific. How about ideas if you or somebody else was really sensitive to noises in the environment? Are there ideas that you would have on how you could change your workspace to help with those?
Earplugs, headphones ×2.
Okay.
And then the person that asked if they put their answers here, yes, that's where they go. Noise canceling, white noise, a lot of noise canceling headphones.
Okay.
Echo reducing ear inserts. Policy to turn off computer notifications and cell phone ringers. Headphone or a door would be nice.
Okay.
Individual or isolated office space. Loop earplugs are a miracle. Headphones get tiresome themselves, though, they said.
Okay. So those are, once again, all really great ideas, because you're talking about ways for the individual to block out noises, but changes also in the environment or in policy as far as having people turn those off, or like some of you had mentioned, moving people or having a door or something like that. Great answers. Thank you. What about ideas for changes in the workplace that could help someone, for ideas with, or if they have a sensitivity to smells? Any suggestions for smells?
Move the microwave. Move their microwaves to the break room. Yeah, relocation of kitchen microwaves. Ban cologne. Better ventilation. Do not allow in the work area. Request food be eaten in a lunchroom. Ban seafood. No diffuser policy. They had this problem at their last workplace. Air purifiers. See if the source of smell can be limited somehow. Cleaning supplies that are scent-free. A fan.
I love the creativity in all of those. Like, there's a lot of variation, not just, some of it's related to the, to the microwaves and the break rooms and stuff like that. But there are other ideas as far as people who have diffusers or candles even, or the colognes and perfumes. And I love the idea that somebody was thinking about the cleaning products being used in the office or in the workplace. Those are terrific. Good job. And what about one more question? What about ideas for office temperature? What are things that could be changed in the workplace to help with office temperature?
Provide heaters, allow space heaters, fans, cool to 68 degrees, regional controls, allow hats, sweatshirt or heater, move folks that are cold away from windows in older buildings, a lot of space heaters, dress in layers, have a blanket ready, a lap blanket, adjustable louvers. Somebody's happy that their office is cold. Don't let it warm up to 88 degrees over the weekend. Windows to open for ventilation. Blankets, I guess then more blankets. A heated blanket.
Oh, okay. Once again, we have a group, who's giving a lot of different wonderful ideas and variations besides, what the individual can do as far as having, blankets or the, having the employer allow heaters or fans and things like that at the workstations, but also thinking about the arrangement of staff and where, if you have people who tend to get chilled, putting them away from drafty areas and things like that. So those are great ideas. I love those ideas. Anybody have any last suggestions for these that have sort of come up as we went through these?
They said to group people who like similar temperatures together in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. That would be helpful. I can imagine that. So great ideas. You guys are awesome. So some of these items some of these sensory items we talked about may seem like minor inconveniences to each of us, but for a person who is neurodivergent, sensory input could be really difficult to manage and may be very overwhelming. Those individuals who are neurodivergent would benefit from those adjustments in the workplace to remove or reduce these disturbances so they can really fully participate in work and really fully focus on their job. All of your suggestions were really great, and I appreciate all the participation. But with a little bit of thought, you came up with some really great ways to accommodate someone to ensure they can work to the best of their ability. You did a terrific job, and thinking about those and thinking about ways. And I'd like to point out, one of my favorite things to remind people is that many of those ideas that you suggested were no cost ideas, no cost things that could happen, or accommodations, ways to make things, be helpful in the workplace for people. So that is terrific. So before I take questions, I'd like to summarize some thoughts. So throughout this presentation, I emphasized how neurodiversity means there is a variance in how all our brains function, and how many environments have been created for individuals who fall within the norms of that variation. And that can result in barriers for individuals who are neurodivergent. I offered many ideas about removing these barriers through providing reasonable accommodations, like minimizing exposure to sensory sensitivities in the workplace, by relocating workstations, permitting telework, or providing alternative lighting even. We also shared many ideas for altering supervisory methods to meet, that might include meeting more frequently or providing communications in various formats, like whether that be audio, email, or writing. These solutions can enable individuals who are neurodivergent to perform the essential functions of the job in another way. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. These solutions can enable individuals who are neurodivergent to perform these essential functions of the job in another way just as effectively. And when we make these changes and create environments that are inclusive of neurodiversity, we tap into increased creativity, problem solving, and innovation, which are great benefits in the workplace. I really appreciate your interest in the topics today. The learner's guide for today, as Victoria indicated, is available. If you sort of lose track of it, you can find it on our website. It's part of the Employer's Reasonable Accommodation Handbook, which is available on the webinar page of the employer section of Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities website. And so at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
And we have some.
Awesome.
And tried to queue them up here. So the first one that came in, and it was a little bit earlier, is an individual wanted to know, how is the norm, and they put norm in quotes, of brain function defined in this context?
That is a good question. And honestly, I don't have a really good answer for that, to be honest, because because we're talking about essentially sort of a spectrum. And so I can get more information for you, I guess, would be my best answer to that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We don't all know all the answers, but the fact that you're willing to follow up on that, we sincerely appreciate it. So, and I'll be providing you the spreadsheet after our webinar concludes, so you can follow up with that individual.
That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Next question. Are neurodivergent people, do they have to be diagnosed by a doctor, psychologist, or therapist? He said, I think those interview accommodations would be unfair to other candidates if there isn't a documented diagnosis.
Okay, so when we talk about, I'm assuming this question is related to like reasonable accommodations.
Correct, and apparently in the interview process even. Okay.
So when you talk about the interactive process and the request for reasonable accommodations, this is not something this particular presentation touched on, but there are times that you're allowed to request additional documentation in that when the request has been made. And usually those times include when a disability is invisible. These neurodivergent disabilities we've been discussing today tend to be those invisible disabilities. And so you can request those types of things, you can request documentation from a medical provider for additional information on the disability and what accommodations would be beneficial. As far as in the hiring process, and like so that's more, with employees, with the hiring process, I think that's something important to work with your HR team on as far as how they would like you to handle that. There are some ways of providing like universal, having more of a universal design and things that you just offer certain things to everybody to reduce like the number of accommodation requests. And then, for instance, maybe in your maybe you offer sit-stand workstations for everybody in your office, because that way somebody who needs it doesn't necessarily have to respond to it, but it can benefit everybody. So you could sort of take it that way too, where some of these things you may feel comfortable offering to everybody. and could make it can make it more universally designed, so somebody wouldn't have to identify themselves to make that request, and it would benefit, like I said, everybody who's going through the process.
You know, one of the later comments that someone put in here is they just wanted to point out that a reasonable accommodation can enhance work performance from meeting expectations to exceeding. So I think that's a great suggestion you have there. All right, our next question. This individual wanted to know, do you have to have a diagnosis from a physician in order to receive an accommodation for neurodivergence?
That would be as far as like when you talk about a reasonable accommodation request, that sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier, in that if you're talking about a disability that is invisible, the employer may choose to request certain information from a medical provider, from your medical provider. The employer does not have to do that, but they may choose to if it's if it's a type of disability that's permitted to do that. Like I said, sort of up to that employer on how they approach that situation.
Sure.
So
we have another comment. Says, I might have missed this being said, but the last time I saw the percentage of neurodiverse individuals in the workplace, they thought it was as high as 30 to 40%. They wanted to know, would team building help in ensuring populations feel like they belong in the office?
I think earlier, I think the number that we have from EARN is closer to, is not quite that high, but there's different numbers and figures out there. So I guess I won't focus on that so much, but I think the team, part of that when you talk about team building is just making sure you have the opportunity for a variety of different types of social interactions that can give all individuals the opportunity to participate, so that maybe somebody who isn't comfortable in one situation might be comfortable and able to participate in another activity. And so I think the team building, the education, the training, creating that inclusive environment would be terrific.
And then we have some comments here kind of related to interviews.
Okay.
One person wanted to know, they said most applications ask you to identify if you have a disability. They wanted to know your thoughts on whether or not to disclose a disability application. They said they're sure there are pros and cons, but they wanted to know your opinion. And a follow-up question, which very similar, said, during an interview, do you recommend the job candidate to inform the interviewers that they are neurodiverse?
I would go back to, it is always the individual's decision on whether or not they choose to disclose a disability. It's always their decision. And every individual who has a disability does not necessarily need an accommodation. And so they may choose not to disclose a disability until barriers are, until they are experiencing those barriers and feel like they need an accommodation. Sometimes individuals don't realize that their disability is causing problems at work until they're going through a performance review. And they, that sort of helps them realize, or not, maybe it doesn't help them realize that, but sort of brings that to light to them. I don't want to offer my opinion on whether somebody should or should not disclose, because really that is a personal decision. and maybe, when we talk about some of these disabilities too, so for instance, we talked to, one of the ones that we mentioned was bipolar disorder or anxiety disorder. Some of those types of disabilities, they vary over time. So like, it doesn't always make sense to go in and say, I have this or I have this disability. Sometimes that individual is going to want to choose to not disclose until, like I said, until there's a barrier that they're experiencing at work. So I guess just keep that in mind. So if you're feeling like people are, I guess where my comment was coming from is, if you're feeling like people are not being honest by not disclosing that, just keep it in mind that the disabilities, how they affect us, can vary over time. So it's not a matter of somebody not sharing or, not telling you something. So.
Correct. There is one more question here, and then we'll wrap things up. Going back to the interview process, someone wanted to know, could you just simply extend the accommodations to all the interviewees?
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful idea. And that's sort of what I was talking about, referring to earlier, as far as, there are certain things that you may decide it makes sense to offer to everybody, or these accommodations made to everybody. For instance, when we talked about those the ideas for the interview process and the hiring process, one of them was to allow people to provide a written response to your interview questions. Well, that's something, if you felt like it was appropriate, you could do for, allow everybody to do. If you wanted to provide the questions ahead of time to everybody, you could. If you wanted to allow or at least provide the opportunity to make an office visit ahead of time to feel more comfortable when they come in for an interview, you could, those are all things you could do and provide to everybody if you chose to do that. So.
This has been a fascinating topic, and we really appreciate your time. I know that we've had a number of people on today, so thank you so much. And we're going to turn things over to Tanya now, who will
That
wrap
sounds
things
great.
up
Thank
for us.
you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Todd, as Victoria said, and I'm the Employee Engagement Specialist and Human Resources right in Central Office. Hopefully, we learned about the different ways people think, process information, and solve problems. Our goal is to create a workplace where differences of thought is not only recognized, but embraced as a key for innovation, collaboration, and success. I want to thank Shelly for presenting today, and also to thank Victoria for running the GoToWebinar platform for us. And also thank you for being a part of this webinar today and for helping us build a more all-encompassing and supportive work culture. Enjoy the rest of your day and be safe out there. Thank you.